Hi, I'm Robert Krulwich, and the show you're about to see is something new for Nova. We do it from time to time. Instead of one story, we're going to do several, and tonight the stories range in size. We've got one about very big things, another about surprisingly small things, and yet another about incredibly little things, all on Nova Science Now.
This is the most amazing discovery in any field of science in at least the last 10 years.
That big?
Yeah.
Could this be a new species of human? A race of people so little, about 3 feet tall when they're adults, with brains the size of a monkey.
Small. You know, that's under chimpanzee.
Yet it appears they could make tools, they could hunt animals, really big animals. Wow. Could this be?
What the hell have they found?
Stem cells. In California, in Massachusetts, in Congress, the White House, battle lines are forming.
We're trying to create cells, not children.
I think we failed to ask the basic question. Is it a person or is it a piece of property?
Who says women can't compete in science? Well, even this professor who runs a physics and engineering lab which is chock full of female scientists, she says it was very hard for her.
I remember very clearly in high school, I was told don't take physics because if I ever took physics, I would never get a date.
Well, she's now a full professor of physics, but even so, her female students are still being told ever so subtly, science ain't for you.
I always thought, when I'm older, then people won't be like that anymore. But they are.
And the tale of a little frog so cold every winter, he's virtually dead, not even a heartbeat. As in no heartbeat?
Right.
Nothing.
Flatline.
Then comes the spring. And how he wakes up, that's a miracle. Isn't it? You're not going to believe this, and I wouldn't blame you, because if I told you this story, that once upon a time, on a little island somewhere way off in the sea, there lived a race of teeny people not known to science. They lived with elephants the size of ponies. They hunted dragons that spat poisonous saliva laced with botulism and anthrax. You'd say, come on. But here's the thing. An international team of paleoanthropologists think that this story may be true. And tonight we're going to show you evidence that suggests that these little people may have existed on our planet for tens of thousands of years, and even more intriguing, there's the outside chance they may still be around. Midway between Asia and Australia, here in Indonesia, lies the island of Flores. For centuries, the people who lived here told tales of little, hairy people.
They talk about being scared of 3 things. One is elephants, one is tigers, and one is the little people of the forest.
These small people, maybe a metre tall, hairy, with sloping foreheads, thick eyebrow ridges and no chin, and they used to come up to the village, they used to raid their crops, until one day they stole a baby, and that was it. The villagers decided to chase them out of their cave, which was the last they saw of what they call the Ibu Gogo, which is translated as the grandmother who eats everything. Ibu Gogo. Learned people, scholars, dismiss these tales as folklore, but then a team of Australian archaeologists digging in this cave, Liang Bua it's called, discovered something simply astounding. At first, they thought it was a child.
I thought it was a young child because the skeleton was very, very small. The individual was about a metre tall.
About the size of a modern 3-year-old. But then they looked more closely at the skull. The lines on top here would be different if it was a child's skull, further apart. And the teeth, this was no child.
It's in fact an adult. The wear and tear on the teeth shows that this individual was an adult, probably aged about 30. It was a female. We already knew she was very, very small. So then we knew he had something quite unusual.
Unusual is an understatement. Jared Diamond is a scientist, an author.
To me, when I heard of this, I immediately said to myself, this is the most amazing discovery in any field of science in at least the last 10 years.
That big?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's the most drastically different human that existed in the last million years.
Just to give you a taste for this, I am about 6 feet tall. Now here, this is what a full-grown pygmy looks like, 24-year-old adult pygmy. Let's check it out. About 4.5 feet tall. And here is Homo floresiensis. And let's check this. A little over 3 feet tall. That's about 1/2 my size.
It's the smallest human species ever identified anywhere in the world from any time.
Wait a second, says this well-respected Indonesian anthropologist. Teku Yaakob says, I think she's one of us, our species, but with a rare disease.
Therefore, just a small brain, microencephaly.
Microencephaly can severely retard growth in modern people, so she's one of us with a growth disease.
I'm sure about it, yeah.
Well, you're wrong, said the Australian team.
There's no chance at all that it's a pathologically deformed individual of our species.
Welcome to paleoanthropology.
So, since the debate here is highly technical, I visited Ralph Holloway, one of the world's preeminent ancient skull experts. Smaller than this?
Less than many chimpanzees.
And since he's got a cast of the lady's skull, I asked him, well, does it look like our species, like Homo sapiens?
This is a human being. Are these new creatures that you've seen, do they look like this? Or are they? No. They're different in some fundamental way?
Absolutely.
Ralph has examined this cast of her brain cavity, and it's not like ours, he says.
It's low. It's broad.
You're sure of this?
Absolutely.
So what we may have here is a brand new flavor of human. But if we do, how'd this creature get so small? The Australians believe that Homo floresiensis descends, as we do, from the original earlier human, Homo erectus, who came out of Africa and spread to Europe and Asia. But as best scientists can tell, Homo erectus probably wasn't advanced enough to build boats. So how'd they get to the island? Jared theorizes that early humans reached Flores by a land bridge.
All this was going on during the ice ages when around the world a lot of water was locked up in glaciers, so sea level was low.
So what today is water then was land.
You could have walked there, conceivably.
No, you couldn't walk there, but the water gaps were narrower.
Those gaps were so narrow it didn't take much to swim or float across. Other creatures did.
Elephants did it, monkeys did it. If monkeys could do it, why couldn't these dumb humans do it?
But after they got there, he says, the ice age ended, glaciers melted, the ocean rose, and these early humans were stranded. And this may explain why they got so small.
To get small on an island where there are no major predators and where there are not that many nutrients, so you really don't want to be eating any more than you need to if you want to survive. So for reasons of avoiding starvation, it's more efficient to keep small.
So you're not surprised then that this group of human types could become very small?
There are lots of big animals that arrive on small islands, and then over evolutionary time they shrink in size.
There are islands where instead of hippos, there are pygmy hippos. Instead of buffalo, there are pygmy buffalo. Instead of elephants, there are elephants 1/8 normal scale. So maybe people landed on Flores, and they got smaller too, 1/2 our size. The amazing thing, though, is their brains were 1/3 our size.
Small.
Small, you know, that's under chimpanzee, and here it is associated with supposedly sophisticated stone tools. What the hell have they found?
The evidence is showing us that something with such a little brain may have been more capable of doing a lot more things than we originally thought.
The Australians say that they found at the cave site traces of campfire, so the little people may have been cooking with fire. They found stone tools nearby that may or may not belong to them, but they look pretty sophisticated. And remember, these people hunted and ate dwarf elephants. So here's one getting up. Check out the sharp tusks. And look at this one's tusks. And, say the paleontologists, they did okay hunting and eating formidable prey, because not all island species get small.
Warm-blooded animals shrink on islands. Cold-blooded animals often expand on islands to fill the niche left by lions and tigers that could not get out there.
The evidence suggests little people ate Komodo dragon. And these guys weigh in at what?
up to 500 pounds, but it's worse than that.
Because back then, apparently, Komodo dragons were even bigger. And if you get near their mouths, you see that spit?
It's spit that contains botulism bacteria and anthrax and other things that you would not want to get infected by. Really nasty bacteria.
So, most likely, if you're 3 feet tall, you'd want to hunt these animals in groups.
Would that, in your sense, require some kind of signaling or language, or "Watch out, Joe!
Absolutely.
Here comes the lizard"?
Yeah, I tend to be in that camp. Yeah, I really do think that, communal hunting and so forth has to involve, language.
Language, tools, technology, maybe the little people did all that. But if they did it with brains a third our size, those brains would have been very different, radically different.
And that may be one of the great lessons of this, if it turns out. It may tell us, hey...
Oh, you're suggesting that maybe this brain is organized differently so it can do more in a little space.
Oh, it's definitely organized differently. And it may have done more in a little bit of space. Absolutely.
And if that's true, brain scientists would have a whole new model for human intelligence, and that's huge. Meanwhile, back at the cave site, the Australians say they've discovered fragments from 7 additional individuals. All they claim appear to be little people. But the biggest shock was yet to come, the age of these remains. Paleontologists say the first Homo erectus creatures arrived on Flores something like 800,000 years ago. So scientists figured, well, then these skeletons will be old.
We're all expecting it to be maybe 60, 100,000 years old.
But when they aged these bones, one sample was only 18,000 years old. In paleontology, that's like the day before yesterday.
The fact that it came out at 18,000 was pretty much a shock to everybody.
A shock because that means these little people were alive during, well, modern times.
We know that modern humans have been in that area for at least 50,000 years.
So if you do the math, little people and big people shared this island for over 30,000 years.
Final question that everybody is too shy to ask is, well, did we or didn't we have sex with them?
Because if little people became a different species, they branched away from humans and couldn't have babies with us and wouldn't want to.
My bet is we did not have sex with them, and here's my reasoning. I would have predicted that they would have been really nasty, just like any humans would be really nasty.
Because looking at the other things, like, this is an other. I don't know why he's doing this.
That's right. That's right.
To test this, you'd want to analyze the little people's DNA.
And then we can compare their DNA with our DNA, and we'll have a case for whether we may or may not have interbred as we came through Southeast Asia on our way through to Australia.
So what happened to the little people of Flores? It looks like they were wiped out, along with those little elephants they were hunting, by a major volcanic eruption on the island about 12,000 years ago. Or, and this is not impossible, could the Ibugogo still exist?
No.
That's one view. Here's another.
I did have somebody speak to me, a geologist, and he didn't want to be named because, of course, he felt like if he told people he'd seen little people, people would think he'd seen aliens or something like that. So at the moment we are going to follow these stories of an actual cave where they may have been living, and we do intend to go and excavate this actual cave.
Folklore has it that they just simply ran over the volcano nearby and disappeared further west. So perhaps in some other part of Flores they might still be living. It's not outrageous, but it's highly improbable. But it would be worth looking just in case that did happen to be the case.
And now we are going to make something. I am not going to tell you what it is we're making. You're going to have to guess, but we will give you all the ingredients. We will do this in an English kitchen, so we will use English measurements. So, this is a recipe for something. Can you guess what that something is?
This recipe is the key to the future. Take 3 liters of water, add sufficient fat to make a small bar of soap. Take enough carbon for 55 pencil leads. Mix with enough phosphorus to produce 135 match heads. A generous helping of calcium always improves the result. Take enough sulfur to produce a couple of stink bombs. Extract every atom of iron and zinc from a galvanized roof tack. Garnish with traces of magnesium and potassium. Season with a pinch of salt. Bake in an oven at 37 degrees for 270 days. Monitor carefully until incubation is complete.
We will return to the subject of making babies later in the program, and we talk about stem cells, which, by the way, are, again, teeny, teeny little things. But we shouldn't dwell only on small things, because sometimes big things, very big things, can be exciting and scary. So, if I may, thank you. So many of us, when we're little, think about and dream about and play with these celebrated reptiles. So you'd think we would know a whole lot about them, and yet there are things about Tyrannosaurus, basic bottom line things, that nobody knows, like how long did they live? Apparently, there is no way to tell. That's what the experts said. But as our correspondent Chad Cohen reports, the experts were wrong.
For over 150 million years, dinosaurs roamed the Earth. 65 million years ago, they became extinct. For scientists looking to piece together the mysteries of these animals, fossilized bones are among the only clues left.
Perhaps the greatest mystery about dinosaurs like Sue here at Chicago's Field Museum is how did they get so big?
Over 20 feet tall and 40 feet long, Sue is the world's largest Tyrannosaurus rex. How she got that big is tied up in yet another mystery. How long did she live?
Really, it's just like forensic biology.
A mystery Greg Erickson of Florida State University wanted to solve. Greg is a biologist. His expertise is living reptiles, like lizards and alligators.
If you really want to understand the lives of dinosaurs, you need people that understand the lives of living animals in the first place.
Hey, little guy. How are you today?
Today's huge animals, elephants and whales, generally live long lives. To find out if this was also true for T-Rex, well, of course, Greg was going to need to know its age. And that's not so easy.
Just see how much bigger.
Scientists typically age dinosaurs by counting growth rings in the weight-bearing leg bones. Yep, just like trees, but not in tyrannosaurs.
I was always told you can't age tyrannosaurs. The reason being is that tyrannosaurs have hollow bones, just like birds.
That was the problem Greg was pondering when a little over 4 years ago, he made an unexpected discovery at the Field Museum. Greg wasn't interested in what was on display here, but what the museum might have tucked away in the maze of corridors behind the scenes.
These are all pieces of Sue, and as you can see, it's really a jigsaw puzzle that no one can put together.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Dinosaur curator Pete Makovicky's nightmare turned out to be Greg Erickson's dream come true. It was here where he found his first clue.
And I pulled open the drawer here and started looking at some of these rib chunks. I realized how solid they really were.
And when he looked closely, he thought he saw what shouldn't be on a rib bone. Separate, distinct lines that looked a lot like those coveted growth rings. Maybe everything he needed was recorded in these tiny chunks.
I was elated. For the first time, I realized that we might be able to, crack the code and actually age some of the Tyrannosaurs for the first time.
But before he could celebrate, Greg had to make sure, back in his lab in Florida, that his discovery could accurately measure a Tyrannosaur's age.
He needed something living, or at least something that hasn't been extinct for the last 65 million years. And this being Florida, what better than the American alligator, a not too distant cousin of dinosaurs. Turns out these guys have growth rings too, in those same non-weight-bearing bones as T-Rex did.
Since we know their age, we can see if the ages based on the growth rings match up with the actual ages of the animals. And our study showed that you can use the fibula, which is a shin bone. You can use the pubis, which is one of the hip bones here. The ribs work quite well.
Is it exact? I mean, you count the growth rings and that's how old this alligator was?
Yes.
It's amazing. I think,
With that, Greg went to work. His first order of business: assemble a large enough scientific sample of backroom bones.
This is what we are looking for. We look for broken ends like this. and we'd see very nice growth line record. We'd see the
He ended up with the remains of 20 different tyrannosaurs of different ages and sizes. 7 were T-Rexes, including Sue, and the rest, smaller cousins that lived millions of years earlier.
So Gorgosaurus, Daspletosaurus, Albertosaurus.
With these fragments, Greg believed he would not only be able to calculate the ages of different tyrannosaurs,
which were much smaller animals, of course,
but determine how T-Rex grew to be so much bigger.
Basically, we'll take a promising specimen like this, and then we're going to pour an epoxy resin over it and essentially re-entomb the specimen here.
The hardened specimen is then sliced, sanded, polished to a thickness of just 7 microns, and put on a microscope slide. And with the flick of a switch, the life of an animal that lived more than 65 million years ago is revealed. For the first time, science can accurately determine the age of tyrannosaurs. Since one growth ring equals 1 year, all you have to do is count.
So let me see if I can age this guy on my own. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 years old?
He's in his 6th year, yeah. Like there's actually a 6th one right on the rim right there.
6 years old.
So if you went to school for like 11 years, you know, then you'd find that last one.
That's great. It's so clear. It's so easy to see.
After repeating the procedure on some 60 different tyrannosaur bones, Greg knew the exact ages when each had died. Most were in their teens. And in the case of Sue,
the actual age of Sue turned out to be 28. It doesn't seem right, you know, it seems like such a short life for such a magnificent animal. And this has led me to say, you know, T-Rex lived fast and died young. I mean, this is, you know, the James Dean of dinosaurs, there's no doubt about it.
Sue not only lived fast, she grew fast.
And you're seeing here on Sue, you're seeing some of these broader growth bands here. And as you head out towards the outer part here, also they start getting really tight. And
narrow rings mean slow growth, wider rings fast, same as trees. And by comparing the ages when all the different T-Rexes died to their projected weights at the time, Greg could finally show how Sue grew from a 10-pound hatchling to a 6-ton giant in just 20 years, with most of the growth occurring as a teenager between the ages of 14 and 18.
It's just mind-boggling. You know, this is an animal that's putting on 5 pounds a day, so obviously it was eating just an enormous amount of flesh and bone, you know, to pull this off.
But unlike today's huge animals, whose lifespans can be as long as ours, T-Rexes only got to enjoy their bigness for a relatively short time.
And that's because we're pretty sure that Sue here died of old age. Arthritis crippled her tail. Her rib bones, which were broken, had plenty of time to heal. An infection in her mouth left holes in the back of her jaw. It was a tough life, no doubt. And now for the first time, we know just how long a life it was.
Tyrannosaurus rex, the supreme killer of the Cretaceous, terrorized some of the largest creatures ever to walk the earth and earned a permanent place in our imagination, all before the age of 30.
Correspondent Chad Cohen, who already, by the way, is older than most T-Rexes ever got to be. Okay, enough of big, time to get small again, and I mean really, really small. So here is something exquisitely small. This is the tip of a pin, and we're going to move in on the tip and get smaller still. You see those little blobs there? They are bacteria on the pin. And then on the bacteria, you see that little speck? It's a few hundred atoms across. That teeny thing made news recently because it is an invention. It was built by a scientist that you're about to meet, and the fact that she is a she was also news because there aren't a lot of she's doing this kind of thing, and some prominent folks have wondered why. So here is her story. Naomi Hallis knows how guys think. Her ranch in Texas is way, way outside Houston in brush country, so it's a little hard to find. But as it happens,
one of our neighbors used to was a former penthouse pet, so she was a bit of a local celebrity.
So whenever Naomi needed lumber or whatever delivered, all she had to say to the delivery guy, any delivery guy apparently, was,
"Do you know where the stripper lives?" And they would all know. And So rather than going into long, detailed directions, all I'd have to do is say, well, we're about 200 yards past the stripper on the left.
The ranch is for weekends. During the week, Naomi Hallis is a professor at Rice University teaching nanotechnology and applied physics, fields that are 90% dominated by men. But not here, not in her group. If you look around, it's about even, which is different for guys.
What else could I say?
And very different for women.
Being a woman has actually never been an issue for me in this group. You just forget about it, which is nice. It's a nice feeling because a lot of people aren't that lucky.
So how'd this happen? How'd Naomi create such an unusual balance? Even her husband, this is Peter, he joins the group, not as the leader, he's just one of the gang.
This is an event.
Well, there's a story here.
You know, the best science stories are told backwards, okay? So
let's go back a bit. When Naomi was growing up, yeah, that's her, and so is this, she never thought about becoming a scientist, even in high school.
I remember very clearly in high school, although I was always at the top of my class in math and science, I was told don't take physics. And the reason I was told not to take physics was because if I ever took physics, I would never get a date.
So she didn't take physics, she became a musician. And one day she was wondering where sounds came from, and a friend said, well, acoustics requires calculus.
But of course you've taken calculus, haven't you? And it just kind of hit me like a load of bricks. In fact, I hadn't taken calculus. I'd actually bought into this myth that maybe I probably wasn't going to be very good at math.
But she was good. So at 20, she decided, you know what, I'm going to drop music and switch to something science-y.
I thought, well, maybe I want to retool my career.
But what about her, her feminine problem?
No, I didn't have
However you say that.
I didn't have a feminine problem.
In other words, you weren't embarrassed to do ungirlish stuff.
No, I was really butch, actually.
So she switched from music to chemistry and then, interestingly, chose a female-friendly graduate program at Bryn Mawr.
Bryn Mawr was certainly a place where women were 100% accepted.
And that's where she got her MA and PhD in physics, and she married.
Have you thought about doing that?
And when she joined the faculty at Rice University, Naomi found herself increasingly attracted by the world of the very, very small, the nano world.
This is a vial of gold nanoparticles, solid gold nanospheres.
They're so small you can't see them. They're little clumps of gold atoms. But if you could invent a clump that's hollow inside, it'll absorb a different color of light. And by changing the thickness of the gold shell, you can make it absorb whatever color you want. So look, here, what was once ruby red is now clear. Naomi's work was new and very interesting to graduate students, well, to men. Women...
For the first 6 years, I had no women whatsoever. And then I had one. And once I had her, I became okay. And then lots of other women began to join my group.
Which was at first kind of unusual.
We're changing that. It won't be unusual for long.
Women told women this is a good group. Naomi says, I never planned this.
It just seems to sort of happen. Maybe having all these women attracts the men.
So in the end, she gets a balance. But the growing gang of women at Rice were at first invisible.
For most of my scientific career, I didn't publish with my first name in the paper. I was always Ann Hallis. So many people knew about my work and had no idea I was a woman because they read my work in literature.
But when Naomi and her colleagues created nanoshells by manipulating atoms, then the world noticed. The New York Times, Popular Science, Profiles. Nanoshells made Naomi and her lab famous. And yet, even as a tenured professor, plus by now she'd bought the ranch, as successful as she was, one day when she was presenting her findings at a meeting at Rice,
a man walked up to me and in a very loud voice said, "Excuse me, are you the lady in charge of the coffee?" And when I heard that, I just turned around and I walked back to my office and I just sat there and, I almost burst into tears. This is ridiculous. I don't want to have, is it for the rest of my life I'm going to be mistaken for somebody who's in charge of the coffee? And then I said, no, I think I will go back there because I don't want that person to win. I want to I want to participate in this forum, and I don't care if he thinks I'm in charge of the coffee. So I went back.
And the contact she made at that meeting led to a business which she started with biology professor Jennifer West, and they are now injecting nanoshells into animals with cancer. So here, just for fun to demonstrate, we're using a chicken breast. The nanoshells will gather inside the tumor.
And once they're in place, then light is shined through the skin and down into the tumor site.
Warming up the nanoshells so they burn the tumor. That's the steam here.
And that's sufficient to kill the cells in the tumor.
So without radiation, with light, you can attack cancer sites.
That's incredibly non-invasive if you consider other types of cancer therapies.
These therapies are still being tested by the women and the men who have gathered around Naomi. But the women, she says, even now, have to struggle to stay in the game.
I always thought it was a generational thing. I always thought, well, when I was a young scientist, I thought, oh, those are the older people. They're like that. But when I'm older, then people won't be like that anymore. But they are.
Too often, female grad students drop out, lose confidence, struggle to balance children and family. Naomi, I noticed, does not have children, which made me wonder if that's about work.
No, I cannot have children.
Oh.
So it's not that we didn't try. I am absolutely... I mean, that's another thing that people sometimes do look at someone who's childless and say, well, you like science more than, children and flowers and, things like that, But no, I like kids too.
But what she doesn't like is that half the kids, all the girls, still have trouble making the life that she has made. That struggle isn't over. Nanoshells are little, or very little, but little things matter. Remember how small a life is at the very beginning. A fertilized human egg, a few days after conception, is so small that if we go back to our pin, I could place the embryo, here we go, on the tip, the pointy tip of a pin. Which raises the question, when life is this small and this preliminary, how do we honor what's here? There are scientists at Harvard, and you're going to meet them, who say it is sometimes right to use embryonic cells to investigate diseases and explore cures. Others say, yeah, but remember, this is a potential life, and we can't end that potential. That would be wrong. And we're going to show you very precisely what it is the scientists do to embryos so you can see for yourself. Because in the end, finding a balance between hope for cures and respect for life, that's the challenge. Here's our report from correspondent Patty Kim.
Lauren Stanford is a busy 13-year-old.
We won the soccer championships. That one, I think I got for high honors.
And she's got another major project, keeping herself alive.
At 7:15, I checked my blood. At 9:30, I checked my blood. 186. At 12:11, I checked my blood. Pull that up. At 2:45, I checked my blood. At 6 o'clock, I checked my blood.
So this is it, huh?
Yeah.
Lauren has type 1 or juvenile diabetes.
Oh, you're hiding.
She's had it since she was in kindergarten.
Oh, yeah, there you are.
Unlike some kinds of diabetes, type 1 requires constant vigilance.
Whoa. Too much.
Counting carbs, checking blood sugar, and adjusting her insulin pump.
Make sure it's a good spot that doesn't have any scar.
What would you say is the toughest thing about having this disease in your family?
It's just invaded every corner of every member of our family. And everything that we're doing and she's doing is simply just keeping her alive.
Oh, wow. So how does this work? What does this do for you?
It gives me insulin. It's giving me insulin all around, like every 10 seconds I get insulin.
Even with all her high-tech gadgets, Lauren cannot control her blood sugar as well as a working pancreas.
Up into your arm, and there's a needle that actually goes into your arm.
Yeah, but then you take it out and it's just
After 15 or 20 years with diabetes, the danger grows, possibly leading to kidney failure, heart disease, blindness.
That's the glucagon. You need it when you have like a seizure. I don't want to lose my eyesight. I don't want to have brain damage. I don't want to die of early age. Like, who does? Like, that's the only thing that scares me.
As soon as you change, you have to check your blood. Now.
But many scientists say that hope may be on the horizon.
I do think we can cure it, and our research has convinced me that that is going to be possible. Everything we learn says that it is possible.
Doug Melton has spent the last 7 years searching for a cure for diabetes. His work is personal. Both his children suffer from the disease. Today, he's optimistic about their future, thanks to a hot new field in medical research, which we've all heard about: embryonic stem cells. These are cells that have the potential to become nerve cells, heart cells, blood cells, any kind of cell in the human body. Melton, now co-director of the new Harvard Stem Cell Institute, wants to turn them into insulin-producing cells so they can help diabetics. So far, embryonic stem cells have been made mostly from frozen embryos left over from fertility treatment, and that on its own is controversial. But now there's a whole new way to make them that's drawing even more fire. It has to do with cloning. In February 2004, scientists in South Korea announced they had cloned human embryos and used them to create stem cells for research.
I said, wow, they've done it. I wish we had done it.
Good, good.
Dr. George Daly is a pediatrician who also studies stem cells.
The fact that that barrier has now been passed, I think really motivates a lot of other scientists to say, we can do it too.
Now, when most of us hear the word cloning, we think of the cloning of people, the stuff of science fiction films, both scary.
They are totally obedient, taking any order without question.
Dr. Evil.
And absurd.
He is exactly like you in every way.
Call him Mini-Me.
I don't know any credible scientist who wants to do that, who's working on that, and I think that we as a nation and as a world of community should outlaw that. There's really no reason to be doing that.
I think it's important that it's clear that we're not cloning organisms, that we're cloning cells, that we're trying to create cells, not children.
So if they're not making copies of people, what kind of cloning are the scientists talking about? Well, they say it would work like this. Start with an egg from a woman's ovary, remove its genes or DNA, then take a cell, like a skin cell, from a patient and put its DNA into the egg. This is called nuclear transfer. Add a few chemicals and the egg starts to divide just like a fertilized egg. After a few days, it becomes a blastocyst, a ball of about 50 to 200 cells. If you wanted to clone a person, then you'd have to place the blastocyst in a woman's uterus. A similar process was used to create the famous sheep Dolly. But these scientists don't want that. So instead, and this is the step that causes so much controversy, they would break down the outer layer of the blastocyst. It's at this point, there's no turning back. The blastocyst cannot develop into a child, but the remaining cells can become embryonic stem cells, ones with the exact same genetic makeup as the patient. The potential benefits are obvious to doctors like Leonard Zahn, who sees a lot of patients needing bone marrow transplants. For 2/3 of them, there's no donor with an acceptable genetic match.
How are you feeling?
Even if a donor is found, the match is never perfect. Zahn says with cloning, scientists could, in theory, grow cells customized to an individual patient.
Thank you. You used embryonic stem cell technology. You might be able to generate embryonic stem cells that have the same immune system as the patient. You'd have less chance of rejection, and we would hope that there'd be less death rate associated with that.
With cloning, this little boy, in theory, could get bone marrow cells that perfectly match his body. But there's much more to cloning than custom-made transplants. The thing that has scientists all over the world really excited is that cloning could allow them to do something completely new and different. Make sick cells. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, let's say you could take a cell from a patient, someone like Lauren. Create a clone. Let it grow in the lab until it's a blastocyst. Make stem cells. Then you could watch the cells as they get sick. That's exactly what Doug Melton wants to do.
Just like Abbott and Costello said, who's on first? When you're watching these cells develop, one of them is going to make a mistake first. One of the genes in the disease cell line is going to screw up. And we want to be watching it every minute to say who's on first, who screwed up first. If we follow those cells in a culture dish, we can get at the root cause of the disease.
If you could learn how Lauren's diabetes got started, you'd have a much better chance of curing it. This might work with lots of diseases that right now develop invisibly inside patients. Not just diabetes patients, but Parkinson's patients, Alzheimer's patients. That's why, instead of just studying healthy stem cells, scientists like Harvard's Kevin Eggen want to use cloning to create stem cells that are genetically predisposed to a disease.
Well, for certain diseases, it's true that cloning is the only way to do it. By taking cells from an individual which already has that disease, it does allow us to make embryonic stem cells that we know carry all the genes that are required for that disease.
This is one of the frontiers. It's enormously exciting research. It's very valuable. It's a whole fresh approach.
Uses a holding...
Nobody can guarantee that this approach will lead to cures. And even if it does, tangible results could be 5, 10, 20 years down the road. But right now, it's unclear whether these scientists will even get started.
This is the worst kind of science imaginable.
The Catholic Church, along with many pro-life groups, has been a major opponent of cloning.
Making human life simply to destroy it leads us right down directly on the road to barbarism.
The ayes are 265.
The U.S. House of Representatives has voted twice to make all human cloning a crime. If the bill becomes law, anyone who defies the ban could go to jail for up to 10 years and face $1 million fine. The measure is stalled in the Senate, but Senator Sam Brownback is trying to change that.
The president's ready to sign a human cloning ban. We've been blocked in the Senate. With the last election, we're going to revive efforts to try to ban human cloning.
President Bush supports some embryonic stem cell research, but only on a limited number of cell lines. He opposes cloning.
We should not, as a society, grow life to destroy it. And that's exactly what's taking place.
I personally believe that the nuclear transfer embryos that we create are, in a sense, not new life. I would argue that that embryo that's growing in a dish, just like many other in vitro fertilization embryos, doesn't actually have the potential to go on to become an individual unless it's transferred into the uterus of a woman who's willing to carry it to term.
When does that human life significance begin? We know biologically it begins at conception. That's when your life began. That's when my life began. If I kill you as an embryo, you're not here today. If you kill me as an embryo and research on me, I'm not here. So we know that biologically.
When does a human become a human with all the legal rights and protections of a person? Much of the debate comes down to this: a human blastocyst smaller than a grain of sand. Whether cloned or made from the union of egg and sperm, is it the same as a person? What are its rights?
What is a human embryo? What is a human clone? Is it a person or is it a piece of property? And most Americans look at this and they say, life begins at conception. And if that's so, that life, there's a sacredness to it and we shouldn't be violating it.
Oftentimes this issue is couched in terms of when does life begin. I think of it more of an issue of when does a person begin. And personhood for me is a process. The fertilized egg has the potential to become a person, but it won't necessarily become a person. Imagine you and I are sitting in an IVF clinic with my son, and the fire alarm goes off. So now I have the choice of taking my son out of the room or grabbing a freezer with 100 fertilized eggs. Which would I choose? I think for me that emphasizes the difference between a real life, a person who exists, and a potential.
Both the blastocyst and the child are alive. Some scientists say we're approaching a crossroads where we, as a society, have to choose. What life do we value more? Lauren's mom, Maura McCarthy Stanford, is a Catholic and the parent of a diabetic child. Hopeful that the work might lead to a cure for diabetes, she supports cloning for research.
To me, that ball of cells is the miracle of possibility. It's the possibility of becoming a human being if it ends up implanted in a woman. It's the possibility of becoming cells to be put in my daughter because she needs to be cured of diabetes. It's the possibility of becoming the nerve endings for a spinal cord so someone can walk again. It hasn't made its mind up yet of what to be, and therefore it is a possibility of all different kinds of life, whether it's new life or saving life.
That's correspondent Patty Kim with additional reporting by Deborah Amos. Well, as we all know, it is finally springtime. So, before we go, I wanted to celebrate the season, and I can think of no better way than to introduce you to a creature who is, again, very, very small and lives down here somewhere close to the ground, doing things that I think you will find very surprising. Here's the thing about North American wood frogs. They're small.
So it might be very difficult to spot a frog.
Very small, but they're everywhere, just out of view, hiding on the forest floor. Nothing.
He's camouflaged. His coloration is the same as the soil around him. You see him here? He's cold.
You can find them here in southern Ohio and all the way up to the Arctic Circle. But wherever they are, once it gets cold with the first sprinkle of ice, this frog does something I didn't know was possible. As soon as the frog touches, just touches an ice crystal.
This animal is going to freeze.
Freeze?
Freeze. Solid freeze.
That touch of ice immediately sets off signals inside the frog, says Professor John Costanzo, that pulls water away from the center of its body, so the frog's internal organs are now wrapped in a puddle of water that then turns to solid ice.
I still can't get over it. It's really an amazing thing.
There is no breathing, no kidney function. The heart stops.
And there will be no heartbeat for a long period of time.
You mean as in no heartbeat?
Right.
Nothing.
Flatline.
Flatline. For an hour or two?
It could be for days, perhaps even weeks.
Really? It sounds like it's virtually dead, no?
We know that the frog isn't dead, but he's probably about as close as you can get.
To being dead?
Yes.
So, from the outside, this little frog feels like a rock. Except that as it froze, the frog flooded itself with a kind of sugar.
The frog's blood sugar is distributed through the circulatory system. It works like an antifreeze.
It's harder for the water to freeze, so cells stay just damp enough for the animal to hold itself together. Until the springtime. When the days grow a little longer, and the ground gets a little warmer, and then, well, a kind of miracle happens. After weeks or months of no heartbeat, none, suddenly there's a pulse. And that first heartbeat leads to another, and then another, and then within a day, and in the case of this little frog, it took about 10 hours, the animal literally comes back to life.
spontaneous resumption of function.
Why?
We don't know. We don't know what triggers that event.
And think how elegant a business this is. Because although the sun is warming up the outside of this little guy, somehow his insides, his heart, his brain, they thaw first. His insides warm up before his outsides. But somehow it all happens in perfect synchrony every spring.
Yes, and it's going to undertake a very energetic activity. It's mating time.
You mean hours after it thaws, it's going to do it with a lady?
It's going to perform.
Uh-huh. What an animal.
Can we say that on TV?
I don't know whether we can or not. Well, we just did. Come on, we should give him a little privacy and leave now. But before we do, on subjects small and large, remember, nanoshells, stem cells, frozen frogs, little humans, T-Rexes. As the bee says, visit our website, pbs.org. You can watch any part of this broadcast over again, join discussions, whole lot more. Till we meet again, goodbye.
Nova is a production of WGBH Boston.